Today we're going to do a luscious field of purple and pink flowers. I'm going to start off my piece here with a little bit of a message. Before I started painting the background, I put a little bit of paint down. You can see the texture there. It's just globs of paint. I just wanted to give it some texture. Then I put the orange and the yellow down. You're not going to see that at all, except for whenever I go and do some scrape through, you'll see a little bit of the orange and yellow scrape through the sky and the grass area. The paint I used to give the texture is just some paint that I had laying around that was going to go bad. I think I used it for a paint flow, like the acrylic flow paints. And I haven't been doing that in a while, and that paint was going to go bad. It was pretty thick as it was, so I just laid it horizontal on this piece. In the end, it's going to kind of look like waves in the background. Some people say it looks like water. I think it kind of looks like, gives a feeling of wind. I put down, you kind of saw me making it a little bit thinner there. It was getting a little bit too thick, and then it was losing the texture that I put in. Here's just a little bit of white to suggest some clouds. Then I'm going to go in with some purple paint. There's going to be some other colors over the top of that. Got to have a little message in here as well. And those purples, I'm going to have some purples and some really deep blues, and it's going to set the grass and the foliage that I'm going to be putting in, help that set that background in there. You'll see that I did that blue, and I'm keeping that purple away from the blue for right now, but then I start getting it mixed together, and I get a really good mix of the two of the colors. And so I don't want a really sharp horizontal line between the blue and the purple. I want them to mix together and seem natural there. Now I've got my scraping tool. I made sure I got that background done pretty quick so my paint was still wet, and now I'm taking the scraping tool and scraping into it so you can see the oranges and the yellows in there. You can take, this is just a stylus tool, but you could take a fork, a palette knife, just about anything that you can scrape into that paint with. And I'm putting quite a bit in there because a lot of these scrapes are going to be painted over, so I'm going to make sure that there's enough in there that some of them do show through. So it looks like you missed me putting some grass in there. What I did was I took the angled paintbrush, and I've got some dark greens, some navy blues, some of that purple that was in the bottom there, and even some light greens, and to get that grass. Now I've got my palette knife going. I've got a rounded palette knife. I've got two different colors of purple, and I'm putting that paint on that palette knife pretty thick. Let's take a look at this and listen to some music. Now I have my little squirt bottle. These things can be a pain in the butt. They're always getting clogged, but they're so nice for making some nice thick paint go down for the stems of the flowers. Uh, and you know how, just imagine, you get a big glob and then a bunch of air poofs out. I kind of like it because it looks like pieces of the flower, like little leaves sometimes. Sometimes you can mess it up. You gotta start over. But, I mean, that's what this is all about. Looks like I've got some rouge and magenta here for these flowers. They're just gonna be some 3-petaled flowers. I like to make my flowers varied in about every way possible. Value and color, how many flowers there are, how many petals they might have. Even the types of stems that I'm making on them are quite varied. I recommend everybody buy this really expensive palette plate here I have. They're called styrofoam plates. They're awesome because I can use them, and then I can use them again, and I can use them again, and then I can throw them away. So we got some bigger flowers. I need to move on to some little tiny flowers or some little flower buds. We can't have all the same size flowers. These I want to get in. The bottom portion of the painting is kind of dark, so I want to get some light little flowers in there. Different colors for my stems. Here you're going to see me use one of the browns I have. Usually some of the first flowers I paint are going to have the browns in them. I know that there's going to be other things laying over the top of them, so I want that dark color that's going to help it set back into the background, so when other flowers go on top of them or stems go on top of them, I want that darker one in the background usually. Not always. Some other colors I use are like chartreuse green, and I don't usually really use a hooker's green very much on there. Sometimes I'll use a purple, a deep purple that by the time it dries, it really looks like it's almost black. here's a nice close-up of these stems. You can see how thick that paint is. They just pop right off of the canvas. Almost always I put my lightest values of flowers in first, and for that matter even stems and foliage. The lighter values I usually put in last. You can see that I'm going layer by layer here. I've let just about every layer dry in between. I might do two of the different colors flowers while they're still wet, but I usually try to let those dry too, because as I'm working with the palette knife, if I got a lot of wet paint on there and it's so thick and it's coming off of the canvas, I'm gonna probably stick my hand in a flower and mush it and mess it all up. But as you can see, there's so many layers here, and the more layers that I have, the deeper this picture gets. You can see things go into the background. You can see things pop up off of the canvas. One question I almost always get with these paint is, how long does this take to dry? This paint is so thick. It's a thick body paint. I also use regular acrylic, and I mixed matte gel in there or molding paste to make it thicker. But this is, I mean, you can really see how thick that paint is. Usually I'll let it dry overnight and then work in some other flowers. It's not completely dry, but it's definitely, you know, like dry to the touch. But if you were to push on it, it would be mushy. And all in all, like for it to completely dry, I kind of like to at least wait a week to get it really good and dry before I will put my gloss medium over the top of it. Thought I'd show you a little bit more of a close-up of how these flowers are going onto the canvas. I've got a rounded palette knife and I'm really loading it up with a lot of paint. One side of the palette brush will have one color and the other side will have the other color, and that helps give the variant of a flower. I'm almost always, there's two colors on that palette knife whenever I'm doing flowers. I mean, have you ever seen a flower that's just, you know, one color? There's at least values, different values of the one color if it is. Sometimes I got to go back in and figure out how to make that leaf look a little bit better, or that petal. I usually always like to have some of my paint go off of the edges. I just think it's a really unique look. I've got wrapped canvases and I'm painting on the sides of the canvases as well. So there's no need for a frame. Not that you could ever even get a frame over the area that I've got the paint to overlap the edge. purple that I was talking about earlier is so dark whenever it dries. I'm putting in some of these little vines that I started doing. I don't know what it is about these little vines, but for some reason you want to get into this garden, and it just looks like a fairy tale garden when these things go in. Then you'll see I'll put some petals on it, or maybe they're leaves. I'm not even sure what these things are, but there's something in my garden. Now I've got probably the smallest of my palette knives. It's got a nice little rounded tip, but it's a pretty dainty little palette knife. And I'm getting those little leaves in there. And I'm going to go all the way up these vines. They're going to twindle through this garden. And like I said before, this paint is pretty dark, and I found out right away that I needed to accent this somehow. So later on in the painting, I'll show you how I accent this vine. Here we go. This bright orange with a little bit of rouge in it is really gonna pop this picture. I don't think I can do pink flowers without getting a little bit of orange flowers in the painting too. There's something about a pink and an orange that go together so well. One thing I don't think I mentioned when I'm using my squeeze bottles with the paint in there, I'm not trying to get perfect little stems. I try to go pretty fast, and there's going to be skip marks. Like I said before, sometimes some air blows out, but my stems are, everything in this painting is really, really loose, as you can see. I wanted you to see the texture in this painting from the side. The background has texture, and then of course the flowers themselves have textures. There's a lot of good things going on in this painting. Now I've got my stylus back out, and I've got some iridescent silver paint. I'm putting some little tiny flowers in there. These are really dainty little flowers. Here's a little bit closer. You can see these flowers. They're really just little dots. I usually make one or two, and then the next row down has two, the next row down has three, and then we go back to two and to one. Sometimes I'll use my squirt bottle to put their stems in. A lot of times I'll just use a really thin paintbrush to put their stems in. You can see close up that they're just a really tiny little detail. I don't hold my paintbrush like really close to the tip of it. I'm probably about halfway back on that paintbrush. This helps me give it a really nice soft stroke, and it's not a real uniform stroke. I just really want it a light, airy touch. I could go back even farther on the handle of the brush, but knowing me, I would probably drop it. Pay close attention to which way your stems are going. If you're right-handed, they all want to go the towards the right, and you got to really make sure that you have your stems going in a lot of different directions, kind of S shapes, not too straight, but you definitely really kind of keep an eye on that. Here I've got my stylus back out, and I've got some gold paint, and this is where I was telling you those vines there, you can see how much darker they got, and I'm just highlighting them. It's pretty tedious. I highlight every single little leaf on there, and of course I'll choose one side to highlight. So this is like the bottom of the leaves on this one. I will highlight both sides of the vine, but the leaf itself, I don't do the tops and the bottoms. I just want one side of it done. Now I'm working on highlighting some of the petals of some of the flowers. I don't do all of the flowers this way, and I'm kind of just looking for the edges that are sticking up. That paint, whenever I put it down with that palette knife, the edges will start sticking up, and I'm just dragging that stylus over the top of them. I could do this with a brush, but I kind of like doing it with the stylus because I can't press really hard with it or it's going to start making a groove in the paint. So I'm laying it on there pretty thick. And like I said, I don't do every single flower. I think the varying it is much better.